Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be doing my first deck tech. One of my favorite decks, probably more on the higher tier uh, when it comes to competitive magic. Let's get into it. We're doing Emry, Lurker of the Loch, a legendary creature, merfolk wizard for 2 colorless and 1 blue on a 1/2 body. The text box reads, "This spell costs 1 less for each artifact you control. When Emry Lurker of the Loch enters the battlefield, put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then tap. Choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn." So we are going to be doing a lot with our graveyard. We are going to be doing a lot with milling ourselves, and we need a lot of artifacts. So we have 22 basic island. Nothing too special about that. We are running a few utility lands as well. We are running Minamo, School at Water's Edge, a legendary land. Tap to add 1 blue to your mana pool, or pay 1 blue and tap to untap target legendary permanent. We'll be using this to untap our commander, Emry Lurker of the Loch. We have Sequestered Stash, which we can sacrifice to mill ourselves and put an artifact from our graveyard on top of our library. This helps us dig deeper. Getting more cards into our graveyard is basically like getting more cards into our hand with this deck. Then we have a Riptide Laboratory. Taps to add 1 colorless. Pay 1 and 1 blue to tap to return a wizard you control to its owner's hand. Our commander is a wizard, so we'll be using that to bounce our own commander to our hand, either to save her or to help us replay her to get that second line of text to mill ourselves. We want to keep doing that as much as possible. We have a Field of Ruin, of course. Some people like to run Urborg or other scary lands that can really change the game. Cabal Coffers and such. So it's always good to be able to get rid of those. Reliquary Tower, we're probably going to end up drawing a lot of cards. We may need to end our turn with a lot of cards in our hand. We could always discard down. It's, like I said, having cards in your graveyard is like having cards in your hand. But revealing your hand to everyone is always a dangerous move. So Reliquary Tower is always nice. Rogue's Passage, in case we want to get something beefy through. Darksteel Citadel, this is to get our artifact count up early game to be able to cast Emry. We're also running a Seat of Synod for that same reason. Then we are running all 3 of our Urza Tron lands. It's always nice to have extra colorless mana when we're only running 33 lands in the deck in total. To the meat of the deck. And the overall strategy, we're going to be trying to grind, blast, and level our competition. What do I mean? Okay, so Grinding Station is a 2-cost artifact that says you tap to sacrifice an artifact, and target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. Whenever an artifact comes into play, untap Grinding Station. So, we can use that on our opponents, or as I said, we can use that on ourselves to dig deeper into our deck. Blasting Station, yeah, we are not looking to use this on ourselves. We will be sacrificing a creature to deal 1 damage to target creature or player, and whenever a creature comes into play, you can untap Blasting Station. So, getting a creature out over and over again to sacrifice to Grinding Station, or Blasting Station rather, is how we zap out the table. Speaking of zap, we are also running an Aetherflux Reservoir with the ability to untap these when casting. We're looking at being able to cast multiple spells in a turn, getting us a lot of life off of the Aetherflux Reservoir, which reads, whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. You can pay 50 life to then have Aetherflux Reservoir deal 50 damage to target creature or player. It's just a big old zap tower. We also have ways to sacrifice artifacts to gain mana. If we don't have either of the stations out, we could always sacrifice to the Crag Clan to keep throwing artifacts back into our graveyard, which our commander can then help us recast. So, how are we going to get to all of that? Well, the quickest way to get ourselves out of the game would be Leveler. But we would need others to go alongside, which is why we are running all 3 of the self-mill win strategies alongside the Leveler. So Leveler reads, it is a 5-cost artifact creature on a 10/10 body. When Leveler enters the battlefield, remove your library from the game. So you're just going to exile your whole library and then play one of these 3 and just win the game. So Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, 4 Loyalty Planeswalker for 1 and 3 blue mana. If you would draw a card while you have no cards in your library, you instead win the game. You can force yourself to draw a card with this, with its +1, which is always perfect to play immediately after the Leveler. This is 9 mana though, so again, having the Crag Clan and multiple artifacts on the field to help you net that mana, that works perfectly. We also have, as a secondary, with the same text on a 2/2 Human Wizard, if you would draw a card while there are no cards in your library, you instead win the game. Just doubling down. And as a tertiary, we have the Thassa's Oracle, Merfolk Wizard, for 2 blue mana. It reads, when Thassa's Oracle enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Put 1 of those cards on top of your library and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. If X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. So this is just an instant win effect. As soon as it hits the battlefield after Leveler, it's GG. So ways that we can get ourselves set up for this, we have a Mystic Forge. This allows us to look at the top card of our library at any time. You can cast artifact and colorless non-land cards from the top of your library. You can also then pay 1 mana, or 1 life rather, and tap it to exile the top card of your library if it's just a dud at the time. We also, as another alternative win con, outside of milling ourselves for an instant win or repeatedly casting the same artifact or creature from the graveyard after blasting and grinding, we can always Mindslaver the table. If we get ourselves to a situation where we have infinite mana, and we have several ways to do that in this deck, we can just recast this Mindslaver from the graveyard and Mindslaver the next player and the next player until it comes back to our turn. Basically taking control of the entire board. Nobody's able to do anything outside of being able to cast on your turn. Now, we have several free cost artifacts that help us net mana. So we're running a Mox Opal. And with the commander, it's basically has affinity for artifacts. So every free artifact that we can cast at the beginning of the game ensures that we can get our commander out sooner. So we also have a Lotus Petal, which we can sacrifice to get mana positive. We are running a Mishra's Bauble as well as an Urza's Bauble to help us draw cards. Also get knowledge of players' top deck or card from hand. Then we are running several free cost creatures such as the Phyrexian Walker, Memnite, Ornithopter, Shield Sphere, and Frogmite. Frogmite does cost 4, but as the texts for affinity read, this spell costs 1 less for each artifact you control. We're going to have a lot of artifacts on the field. At minimum, 2 of our land are artifacts, so this is almost always going to be a free cost creature. We're also running a few X cost creatures, which if we pay them for nothing, they just are sacrificed, which is all right. There's several ways that we can abuse that. The Aetherflux Reservoir comes to mind. We're running a copy of Hangerback Walker. This one is the alternate copy of the Mechagodzilla Battle Fortress, but it reads Hangerback Walker enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Its mana cost is XX. Whenever it dies, create one 1/1 colorless Thopter for each +1/+1 counter that was on Hangerback Walker. You can also pay 1 mana to tap it and add an additional +1/+1 counter. So this can help us get a lot of blockers if we can power it up and then sacrifice it using our commander to recast it, especially if we're sacrificing it to the Crag Clan, netting 2 mana, then we can just recast it with 1 counter on it. So we're also running a Ferexian Marauder, which just is basically another free cost artifact that we can storm off with. We have a copy of Fountain of Youth, simply there to get artifact count up early game. People are going to want to get rid of your commander, so being able to keep as many free cost or low cost artifacts out at any given moment is a huge benefit. So we also have ways to make our spells that are not 0 cost or free cheaper and basically make them free. We are running a copy of Ethereum Sculptor. Artifacts you cast cost 1 less to cast on a 1/2 body. And a copy of Foundry Inspector on a 3/2 body that has the exact same text as Ethereum Sculptor. Artifacts you cast cost 1 less to cast. So things like a Soul Ring become free to cast if you have 1 of those out. If you have 2 of them out, then things like Lightning Greaves, and the Nehruc Stealth Suit are free to cast. The texts for these are, we already know Soul Ring. It's a staple in a lot of formats, especially here in Commander. So Soul Ring just taps to add 2 colorless mana, only costs 1 to cast. And again, if we have either one of the Therium Sculptor or Foundry Inspector out, then we are free casting this and netting 2 mana on the turn that we cast it. So, the Lightning Greaves reads, it is an artifact equipment for 2 mana. Equipped creature has haste and shroud. This will allow us to activate our commander's tap ability on the turn that she comes out, and also grants her protection. So that's always nice. And then we also run a copy of the Nehruc Stealth Suit to add up on the protection that Lightning Greaves gives. But the text for this is a little different than Greaves, so I'll just go ahead and read it off. For 2 mana, it's an artifact equipment. Equipped creature can't be the target of spells or abilities, so again, it's Shroud, just in full text. You can't even target the creature with any spells or abilities, so that's, you'll have to find a way to work around that. But the bonus to this is that you can pay 2 blue mana at instant speed to attach this artifact to a creature. Otherwise, you're paying 1 colorless mana as a sorcery action to equip this to a creature. But for 2 blue, you can instantaneously give any of your creatures Shroud and protection from whatever was coming at them to begin with. So, those are ways to protect our commander, because we are going to need her to combo off. And we also run a copy of Basalt Monolith, because we're also running a copy of Isochron Scepter. And we're running Isochron Scepter, Basalt Monolith, and Soul Ring to net infinite colorless mana with our copy of definitely should have put it next to it. Dramatic Reversal. So, Isochron Scepter has imprint, so when it comes into play, you have to exile a card from your hand. Well, you don't have to. It does say you may. So, you can choose to not, but I always go with either a counter on a stick. It's always a fun one. Or a Dramatic Reversal. So imprint reads, whenever Isochron Scepter comes into play, you may remove an instant or sorcery with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand from the game. Then you can pay 2 colorless mana to tap the Isochron Scepter to copy the imprinted instant. You can play that copy without casting it, without paying its mana cost. So the way it works is you attach Dramatic Reversal to the Isochron Scepter, which reads 1 and a blue for an instant, untap all non-land permanents you control. So you use the Soul Ring to pay the 2 to tap the Isochron Scepter to make a copy of the Dramatic Reversal, which would untap all of them, but in response, you tap the Basalt Monolith to net yourself 3 colorless mana, and then you untap all of your permanents, including your commander. These are ways to combo off, and again, this nets you 3 positive mana every time you do it if you have these 2 on. Otherwise, you're just untapping all of your non-land permanents infinitely. So, we're running a copy of Inspiring Sanctuary. Again, we want we're running few land. We're not looking to get a whole lot of land on the field. We want artifacts on the field. Artifacts are just as good as mana, especially when you have Inspiring Sanctuary, which reads non-artifact spells you cast have improvise. Your artifacts can help cast those spells. Each artifact you tap produces 1 mana to pay for that spell. So, all of our non-artifact spells are affected by this. And again, we are running a lot of artifacts. Like Nevinral's Disc, a good deterrent. It's a board wipe on a stick that we can, again, recast from the graveyard. And slowing our opponents down, making sure that they can't harm us. We have a Witchbane Orb. If somebody hits us with any kind of curse or enchant player effect, we can remove that and we then become hexproof. So that's pretty beneficial, especially with if anyone else is running a grinding station or blasting station type effect, they can't target us with it until they deal with this first. So we're running 1 more Planeswalker. We are running Narset, Parter of Veils. This helps us dig through the top of our deck to find the next best card. And then it also reads each opponent can't draw more than 1 card. We use this alongside Teferi's Puzzle Box for 4 mana. It's an artifact that reads at the beginning of each player's draw step. That player puts the cards in his or her hand on the bottom of their library in any order, then draws that many cards. That player draws their card first. So, the start of their turn, they untap, they upkeep, they go to draw. Teferi's Puzzle Box is triggered. They draw their first card. Then they are forced to put their whole hand on the bottom of their deck. Narset sees this happening as the last line of the text on Teferi's Puzzle Box reads, they draw that many cards after that, and Narset sees that they have already drawn 1 card. They are not allowed to have a hand. And that is how we lock our opponents out from stopping our combo off or stopping them from comboing off. If we run into someone who's a graveyard hate type effects, and we get targeted by graveyard hate, we have things like Elixir of Immortality, which is a 1-cost artifact. Pay 2 mana and tap it to gain 5 life, and shuffle Elixir and your graveyard into your library. So good save for us, works in a pinch, and will always keep coming back because it shuffles itself as well. Targeted removal, we're just running a copy of Duplicant as well as a copy of Pongify. We have 1 board wipe, which is, of course, Cyclonic Rift. I'll slow down and go back. So Duplicant is a 6-cost artifact, shapeshifter creature with imprint. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile another non-token creature. So you imprint onto an enemy's creature. As long as that card is exiled with Duplicant, then duplicant's power and toughness are equal to that creature's power and toughness. It's still a shapeshifter and doesn't gain any of the abilities of that creature. It has that body. Otherwise, it is a 2/4 body. Pongify is targeted removal. Again, this destroys a target creature. It can't be regenerated, and its controller makes a 3/3 green ape creature token. Cyclonic Rift. This is a staple. Every blue deck is running it. So reads 1 and 1 blue for an instant. Return a non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, or you can overload it for 7 mana, 6 and a blue, and it just bounces everything that your opponents control to their hands. Your board is safe from this, and you get to carry on comboing off while everyone else is trying to figure out how to rebuild. We have an Aether Spellbomb to help us draw more cards. This goes kind of hand in hand with our Mishra's Bauble and Urza's Bauble. This also allows us to bounce our own commander back to our hand. Again, we want to be able to try to cast her if we're in a pinch and need to dig further into our deck. We're running a copy of Golem's Heart to help us gain life every time we cast. This is when we cast artifacts. So this helps us with building up our hit point total for the Aetherflux Reservoir strategy. Running a copy of Cage Sun for doubling up on the mana that our lands produce. And we'll also run a copy of High Tide, which we could also imprint with the Isochron Scepter to give us High Tide on a stick. Pseudo Cage Sun, but Cage Sun is considerably better. The creatures of the chosen color, when it enters the battlefield, you choose a color, but the creatures of that color get a +1/+1 bonus, and all of the land that you tap that produces that color doubles. So with all of our blue source mana producing land, then we're doubling up on mana. If we have High Tide out, well, then we're tripling up on our mana with Cage Sun and High Tide. So we have one more artifact to build just our total count. This one is a Darksteel Brute. It's an indestructible artifact that can be turned into a creature for 3 mana, a 2/2 artifact creature. It's just a good blocker as long as they don't have trample. And again, if we have Foundry Inspector and Ethereum Sculptor, that is a free cost or at least artifact to put on the field to sacrifice and gain mana or blast somebody out, grind somebody out. And we want to be able to interact. There's not a whole lot of interaction other than the counter spells that we have. So we are running a copy of Shimmermere. It has Flash itself for 3 mana. On a 2/2, you can cast artifact spells as though they had Flash. So most of your deck is going to be able to be cast at instant speed, which is a huge benefit, a huge boon. So we'll also run a copy of Leyline of Anticipation. That's a huge competitive advantage for us if we can get this in our opening hand, because Leyline of Anticipation reads, if Leyline of Anticipation is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. You may cast spells as though they had Flash. All of the spells that you have, everything. So otherwise, if you draw into this later in the game, it costs you 2 colorless and 2 blue mana. Again, getting this in the opening hand, this sets you up for victory. We're running a copy of Secrets of the Dead. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, you're going to draw a card. We're going to be casting a lot of spells from our graveyard. That's what our commander does. That's what our commander wants us to do. So that's what we're going to do. We are also running a copy of Rhystic Study. Did you pay the 1? Whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1 for 2 colorless and 1 blue. An enchantment that just sticks around and has you asking your opponents, are you going to pay 1 for that? So we'll run a copy of Propaganda. There's a lot of people who just want to beat face with tokens or big beefy creatures, a multitude of them. This stops them from being able to do that unless they can pay 2 for each attacking creature. So very good defense. We'll run a copy of Intruder Alarm. This is a combo card. This combos off just as much as our next 4 on our list. So Intruder Alarm reads, creatures don't untap during their controller's untap step. Whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures. This is symmetrical across the board. You don't get to untap during your untap. They don't get to untap during theirs. But whenever a creature comes onto the battlefield, all of the creatures on the board are untapped. So this is a little bit dangerous. It could enable someone else's combo, which is why I like to go with a safer bet of the Mirian Spy. We're predominantly going to be casting artifacts. That's what we're going to combo off with. Mirian Spy is a 1/3 Ferexian drone for 2 and a blue. It reads, flying. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may untap target creature. The second we tap Emry to cast an artifact from our graveyard, as we cast it, Mirian Spy triggers and we untap Emry. Then we can say it's the Lotus Petal. We can then go infinite blue mana and spend that however we want. If it's one of the baubles, Urza's Bauble, Mishra's Bauble, we can infinitely draw out our deck. And again, we're running all 3 of the Laboratory Maniac effects to get an instant win when we draw a card and have no cards in our library. So again, we want to be able to untap our commander. We'll run a copy of Kelpie Guide. This is a 2/2 for 3 mana, 2 and a blue. You can tap this to untap target permanent you control. You can also tap it to tap target permanent. Activate this ability only if you control 8 or more lands. We're more looking to have this untap our commander. As said before, we want her untapped as many times. We'll run a copy of Chakram Retriever. This one only works during our turn, but it is on a 2/4 body for 5 mana, 4 and 1 blue, an Elemental Hound. Whenever you cast a spell during your turn, untap target creature. This is on any spell, not just artifacts. So, we'll run also for a one-time enter the battlefield effect, a Corridor Monitor, which reads, Corridor Monitor enters the battlefield, untap target artifact or creature you control on a 1/4 body. So you can run this several different ways with Emry to untap her infinitely, as long as you also have your Lotus Petal. There are big ways to combo off in this deck. Nearly everything enables a combo in this deck, and we'll talk about some of those now. Let's find our ways. Well, let's talk about a little bit of defense still. We got one more defense card, a Chasm Skulker. This works pretty similar to our Hanger Backwalker, giving us a multitude of blockers when it dies. It reads for 2 colorless and a blue, a Squid Horror 1/1. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Chasm Skulker. Whenever Chasm Skulker dies, put X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk onto the battlefield, where X is the number of +1 counters on Chasm Skulker. We'll be drawing a lot of cards throughout the game. If we can get this onto the field and it sticks, it will be a huge deterrent for people to want to swing into it and or kill it. And again, we also have ways to sacrifice it. The blasting station destroys creatures, so that'll be perfect. Now, how are we going to find all of these and get them in if we don't have them in our hand already? We have a copy of Drift of Phantasm. In a pinch, we've got a 0/5 defender with flying for 3 mana. Or we can transmute it and tutor our deck for a card with 3 CMC. There's quite a bit of combo enabling cards with 3 CMC in this deck, which you've already seen. We also run a copy of Trinket Mage, another 3 CMC for 2 and a blue on a 2/2. Whenever Trinket Mage enters the battlefield, search your library for an artifact with converted mana cost 1 or less. Reveal it and put it into your hand. This is going to allow us to find any one of our 0-cost artifacts that we can then combo off with our commander. We're running a copy of Fabricate to search for any artifact in our library. This will allow us to find our leveler when we have Jace, Labman, or Thassa in our hand, or Jace or Labman on the field. This can get us to our instant win combo. So we'll also run a copy of Solve the Equation so that we can find any of our tutors or counter spells when needed. This is only at sorcery speed, of course, unless we have our Ley Line of Anticipation out. So if we have our Ley Line of Anticipation out, we could use the Solve the Equation to find a counter in a pinch. We're running a copy of Reshape to sacrifice an artifact, to tutor for an artifact. And we'll also run a copy of Whir of Inventions. It has Improvise, so our artifacts can tap to pay for it. And search our library for a artifact equal to the number of mana that we've thrown into it. So that helps us find the cards that we need to win and end the game. And in order to stop other people from stopping us from winning the game. We are running a Swan Song. We're also running the Old School Counterspell, a copy of Negate, a copy of Arcane Denial, a copy of Whirlwind Denial, and a copy of Power Sync. This is a higher tier deck, but not super high. There's no Mana Crypt. There's no free counter spells. But it is fun to watch the players sweat bullets when they realize that you have your combo already on board. When the Mirian Spy hits the field and you have an Urza's Bauble in the graveyard. It's GG at that point, boys. Anyways, this has been my deck tech on one of my favorite higher powered decks that I have. Emry, Lurker of the Loch. This has been your mayor. Take it easy, and if it's easy, take it twice.